Happy Sunday to you guys. So we are in the middle of a series right now where we are talking about suffering, and we're calling it Life Interrupted. And the premise of the series is pretty simple. I mean, really, it's that life really gets interrupted sometimes. You know, there are moments in your life where things don't go according to plan. There are seasons that we'd all probably wish that we could get out of. There are circumstances where things will happen and we don't always know why. It's like, and I think that the image of the interrupted life is the one that makes the most sense, because the truth is, like, we're on a path and then life is interrupted. And so last week, or the first week of the series, we just talked about suffering kind of in general, and two ideas of suffering that are true and difficult. One is that, man, you got to be ready for it, like it comes. And the other part of it too is that when it comes, we don't always know why, which makes it even more challenging. And then really, is the remainder of the series, we've just been looking at different reasons why we suffer. And so last week we talked about suffering that comes because of us. And if you missed that week, honestly, like, I would go back and listen to that sermon, because that sermon it's probably the most important of the series in some ways, because that's the one part of suffering where we actually have a little bit of control. We control what we do. And if we were to eliminate some of the things that we do, we might be able to eliminate some of the suffering in our lives. And so that's what we talked about last week. And then next week is going to be really challenging, but I'm excited about it. And we're talking next week about the suffering that we experience that doesn't make sense, where you can't really point to why all the time or point to where. And we're going to look at the book of Job. And so it'll be very challenging, but I'm excited to kind of walk through that with us as we kind of put a cap on the series. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at suffering that comes at the hands of other people. And so if we were to think about our lives, we probably all have stories where we experience discomfort, where we experience suffering, where we experience something that we would rather avoid. And the reason why we experienced it was because of someone else, because of a decision they made, an action they took, and we are left dealing with someone else's decisions. And even just thinking about that, like, there are moments where obviously it's really serious, and we'll look at those in a second. And there's some where you kind of feel like in life where that definitely could have happened, but you dodged a bullet. I was thinking about this recently. My family and I, several years ago, we went on vacation to Florida, and we went to the Legoland Resort. Okay, we went there because of a YouTuber. I just want you to know that we made that decision because a YouTuber went there, and we were at this Legoland. Okay, and it was like, they have a really nice pool, and so we're hanging out at the pool at the Legoland, and there's a group of kids around the lifeguard, which is kind of weird. But my son wanted to know what was going on, so Jack goes up to the lifeguard and just kind of this group, and he ends up coming back and we're like, what was going on there? Like, it's almost like she was like giving a speech, like it was weird. And he's like, yeah, she did a quiz, and if whoever won the quiz got to break a rule of the pool. What? He's like, yeah, like if you got the most answers right on the quiz, you don't have to follow one of the pool rules. Which just seems like suffering that could come at the hands of someone else, right? Like, if you think about it, like, oh, I'm going to run now because I knew this answer. Like, what is that? Like, I don't even know. But like, it happens. Like, sometimes it happens, right? Suffering comes in, and oftentimes, right, when we think about the suffering in our lives, it's because of something far more significant than a rogue lifeguard. And it's people that we love. It's people that we trusted. It's people that we let in, and because of how close they are to us, what they did hurts even more. You know, even I was thinking about this, and there's so many examples in the Bible that you could pick where you could look at actions of other people impacting someone. But like even I was thinking about last week. Okay, last week we talked about David and Bathsheba, and we looked at it from the perspective of how David's sin impacted David. But the thing is, if you kind of zoom out of the story of David and Bathsheba, not only did his sin impact him, dude, his sin impacted a lot more than just him. That because of David's sin, Uriah died. That because of David's sin, this man Joab, who's the commander of the army, that he has to live with the fact that an innocent man died because he killed him. That even if you think about Bathsheba, gosh, because of David's sin, Bathsheba lost a child, and she lost her husband. And I would love to be able to zoom in and look at that text in particular, but the thing is, the Bible doesn't tell us what they were thinking or anything, so it'd be all conjecture. But there is a story in the Bible where, man, someone really does experience a ton of suffering at the hands of other people, and it's a long story, so there's a lot we can do with it. And it's the story of Joseph. And if you're unfamiliar with the story of Joseph, it's the end of the book of Genesis 37 all the way to Genesis 50. You can skip chapter 38, though. It isn't really about Joseph. It's just a weird one. But really, like, other than that one. Now, see, I said that because now some of you are going to go home and read it. And that's right. But no, so it's this story it's a long story, and we don't have time to read all of it, but just kind of to give you some bullet points about Joseph as I tell his story, that Joseph, he was one of 12 brothers. And not only was he one of 12 brothers, but man, he was his father's favorite by a mile. And it's not like that favoritism that we experience today where it's like subtle from the parent. No, this was like overt favoritism. So much so that like Joseph's father's man named Jacob, and he made a coat for him just to signify that he's the favorite. And it wasn't like a subtle coat. It was a coat of many colors. And so it was just like, I want everyone to know how much I love this guy more than his idiot brothers. And so he makes this coat for him to show that he's the favorite. And not only does he make this coat for him, but also like he doesn't make Joseph like do the work that his brothers had to do. Like Joseph's brothers are out like doing work, and Joseph's like back hanging out with dad talking about the coat. And the story starts, I don't know if they were talking about the coat. I like to think that they were. The story starts, though, with Joseph, where Joseph's father, Jacob, he sends Joseph to go and check on his brothers as they're out doing work. As you can imagine, with 11 brothers, you being the favorite, while that might be good for your relationship with your dad, it's not good for your relationship with your brothers. And so they hate Joseph. And as Joseph comes to check on them one day when they're working, this is when Joseph's story starts to get impacted by the decisions of other people. Look at this in Genesis 37, verse 18. It says, "And they, his brothers, saw Joseph from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, 'Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams.'" Man, this is Joseph. And what ends up happening is he ends up being thrown into a cistern, like a pit. And they're planning on killing him. And then one of the brothers is like, "Hey, let's not kill him. He's our brother." And his thought is, hey, as I'm talking them out of it, I'm going to rescue Joseph, take him back to father, and things will be good. But for some reason, he wasn't paying attention. The rest of the brothers, they end up taking him out of the pit, and they sell him into slavery, into this caravan's going through. And Joseph ends up on a caravan heading to Egypt, where he's going to spend his time as a slave. Man, talk about like decisions, like being impacted by the decisions of other people, right? I mean, Joseph here, he's impacted by two decisions other people made that he didn't make. That at no point in Joseph's life is he like, I want to be the favorite. At no point in his life is he like, I want father to be better to me than, like, he doesn't say that. That just is what happens. And here's the thing. Sometimes it's people trying to do good for us that creates challenges for our lives too. And so he has his father there, and then the obvious situation here is Joseph didn't check on his brothers so they would sell him into slavery. He checked on his brothers because father told him to do that. And now here, because of the decisions of his brothers, Joseph is on a caravan to Egypt, where he will be a slave. Not exactly what you would want to experience. Not exactly feeling as if you're the father's favorite anymore. Not that that really is helping him too much. But here's the crazy thing about Joseph. Joseph's life, in a lot of ways, is a picture of that like cliche where it's like when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. That as people do things to Joseph, even like we sang in the song, that God is with him And because God is with him, even in the midst of difficult situations, he's able to make the most of it. Look at this here. You see this happen while Joseph's a slave in Genesis 39. It says the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. I mean, just think about that. While he is a slave, he becomes a successful man because God's with him. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. And his master saw that the Lord was with him in all that the Lord caused him to do, and he did succeed in all in his hands. So here you have Joseph, and he's thriving in a bad spot. That God is with him, he's a slave, and even as he's experiencing these things, he thrives. He's successful. What ends up happening with Joseph is he ends up climbing the ranks of the house that he's serving, where he gets to this place where literally he's like the number 2 in the house. Not Pharaoh, but the leader of the house, the master of the house, he says to Joseph, he's like, everything is yours, it's mine, except for my wife. And that's where it gets kind of weird. And so he says that, and then Joseph's doing all this stuff. He's leading the house, making good decisions, and he's standing out. And he stands out in such a way that this man's wife, I don't know, he catches her attention. And so she goes to Joseph, and she's like, Joseph, I want you to come to bed with me. I want you to lay with me. And then he responds to her, and he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. The master said I can have anything but you. I'm not going to do that. And what she does, because she's offended or embarrassed, I don't really know, she ends up going to the master of the house and saying the exact opposite thing happened. She goes to the master of the house and says, Joseph came on to me and I turned him down. The master of the house, most commentators believe that he actually doesn't believe his wife, but he has to do something because it's a public accusation, and so he does the only thing he can. And he throws Joseph in prison. And Joseph is in prison because his brothers sent him to be a slave. And then he's in prison because of an accusation that was made against him that was completely false. His life is in this really difficult spot because of decisions that were made by other people. But what does Joseph do? He does what he always does. He trusts God. He takes the lemons that he's been handed and he makes lemonade. That while he's in prison, I don't know if this is the best strategy for running a prison, but he ends up becoming in charge of the prison, which again, I don't know. Like, I'm not a prison warden. Maybe if you are, you could tell me, no, that's actually a really good idea to put a prisoner in charge, but they end up doing that. And Joseph, he becomes in charge of the prison, where he's like running the thing as a prisoner because God's with him and God's helping him and he's making the most of this situation. And as Joseph is in this position, what ends up happening is like people know his gifts because they see him operate in his gifting. And over the course of time, as Joseph is running this prison, the Pharaoh of Egypt, that he has 2 high-ranking officials who do something to make him mad, and they end up being thrown in prison with Joseph. And as they're sitting in prison with Joseph, they have these dreams. And they're like really troubled by these dreams. They don't know what the dreams mean. And someone in the prison is like, dude, this guy Joseph, he knows how to interpret the dreams. Let's bring you to him and let's see what happens. And then Joseph responds this way in Genesis 40. They said to him, we've had dreams, and there's no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. And Tim Keller brings this out in his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, talking about God here. And the fact that Joseph says that after all that he's been through, here's what it reveals. It reveals that Joseph still trusts God. That in spite of everything that he's gone through, out of all the pain that's been caused him by the hands of other people, Joseph is still trusting God with his circumstances. And so he interprets this dream for this guy. And it's kind of a funny story because basically the interpretation of the dream is like, you're going to get out of prison. Like, you're not going to be here forever. You're going to get out. And so then the other guy's like, well, I had a dream too. Tell me what it says. And Joseph's like, you're going to die. Like, and so it was kind of a bummer for that guy. But then the guy, he's getting ready to and Joseph tells the guy who's going to get out of prison, he's like, hey, man, when you get on the outside, I need you to remember me, okay? And he's like, I need you to tell Pharaoh, like, what happened to me. And I shouldn't be in here. So remember me, bring my story to Pharaoh, get me out of here. Like I was betrayed by my brothers. I didn't do the thing they said I was going to do. And so the guy's like, yeah, man, I got you. Don't worry, I got you. And then this chapter of Joseph's life, it ends, verse 23 of chapter 40, where it says, this official, the chief cupbearer, did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. I mean, think about that. That's another person in Joseph's life who made a decision that impacted him negatively. And what we know is that 2 years passed. And you might be like, well, I mean, only 2 years is a long time, okay? I mean, Joseph's probably given up all hope that he's ever going to get out, that they're ever going to remember him. Certainly, he's like, if I'm going to get out of here, it's not going to be because of that cupbearer. Like, what a jerk, you know? But after 2 years pass, the Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt, he has a dream. And the cupbearer is like, oh, snap! You know what? I knew there was something I forgot. He's like, when you threw me in prison, there was a guy who interpreted dreams. I think he can do it. So they end up bringing Joseph out of prison. He ends up interpreting the dream for Pharaoh. Pharaoh's so impressed by his wisdom that he ends up making Joseph basically a vice president over Egypt. It's crazy. There ends up being a famine in the land, and Joseph's brothers end up in Egypt because if they don't end up there, they're going to end up starving. And so Joseph ends up like providing for them significantly. They live in Egypt. It's nuts. And none of it would have happened if Joseph wouldn't have known how to handle suffering that comes our way at the hands of other people. And so what I want to do is I want to look at Joseph's story with the framework that we've used in the previous weeks of how we get suffering wrong, how it can change us, how it helps other people, and how it brings God glory. Because what we can learn is there's a lot of insight in Joseph's situation that we can learn from. And so first, okay, how do we get it wrong? When suffering comes in our path at the hands of other people, how do we get it wrong? Well, I think one of the ways that we get it wrong when suffering comes our way at the hands of other people is we stop doing what God would want us to do, and we just do what we think is best. We kind of throw what we know about God and his ways and what he would expect. We throw that out the window, and we just kind of let our feelings drive the train. And that's one of the ways we get it wrong, because what we're doing in that situation is we're taking something that's bad, and we're making it worse. I coached basketball this year, unsuccessfully, but I did. I coached. And one of the things I would say to my team is I would always be like, don't make 2 mistakes. Don't make 2 mistakes. They made more than 2 mistakes in the game, but don't make 2 mistakes. Don't make back-to-back mistakes. And it was basically if you miss a shot, don't just pout about it. Go back and play defense, because if you just pout about the fact you missed a shot, not only are you going to miss a shot, but someone's going to score on you really easy because you weren't playing defense. What I'm saying is I'm saying, hey, don't take something bad and make it worse. Okay, so when suffering comes our way at the hands of other people, if we let our emotions dictate what we do, we're going to take something bad and we're going to make it worse. If we just do what feels right, then what is ultimately that's going to happen is we're going to let ourselves make a decision that maybe we're not equipped to make in the moment, When really what we should be doing is we should be looking and saying, okay, how would God want me to handle this situation? So we do that. Another way I think that we make it, how do we make it wrong? Like how do we get it wrong? Is we love revenge. Man, we do. I'm in this like Netflix murder doc era of my life right now. Some of you are there. You get it. And man, like, you know, you watch it, and what are the ones that are the worst? It's when there's no resolution, right? One, because it's horrifying, because like, they're still out there, you know? But you want to see, like, you want to see them pay. Like, you want to see you want to know that because of what they did, like, they're going to deal, like, and there's something obviously with letting the justice system work itself out, but here's what we have to realize, is that oftentimes when someone does something to us, it's not our job to make them pay. And as much as we like love, we have to be very careful not to lean into this idea that, well, because they did this to me, I am going to respond by doing this to them. I mean, think of Joseph. Joseph ends up becoming the second most powerful person in the entire land of Egypt. You know what he doesn't do? He doesn't kill the woman who lied about him. But he had the power to do that. Even with his brothers, who created the mess that he was in, when they come before Joseph looking for food, he doesn't like feed them poison. He does put them through a test to make sure they've changed. But once he discovers that they have, he provides for them and his family. Like how many of us would do? We would want to take revenge. Oftentimes we're not put in a position where we're able to take revenge, and so what we do is we lay in bed at night and we think of all the ways we would make someone pay. We think of all the things that we wish we would have said. We think of how sweet revenge would feel if the moment was right and we could do to them what they did to us. And hear me, even though you're not doing it, it's still not what God wants. It's still not God's plan for you. What you're doing is you're trying to make someone pay, and it's not your job to make them pay. This is how we get it wrong, is when we lean in to revenge. Another way we get it wrong, like we get it wrong when suffering comes in at the hands of other people, is we get it wrong when we blame God for it. You know, we talked about this the first week of this series, but it's worth reminding us of the fact that, man, we live in a fallen world. And part of living in a fallen world is that people have free will. And here's the thing, if people don't have free will, then we're all robots. And I don't know that anybody wants to be a robot. And so because we live in a fallen world where people have free will, what that means is that inside of our free will, people are going to make decisions that hurt us. And it's not God who made them make that decision. It's just a product of the fallen world that we live in. And what I think is so beautiful about Joseph is that in spite of all of these things that have come his way, he doesn't like turn on God. I mean, in prison, he's like, don't all interpretations belong to God? And even when the master's wife comes on to him and tries to get him to go to bed with her, look at how he responds to her. He's talking about his master. He says, is he not greater in this house than I am? Nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife? How then can I do this wickedness and sin against God? Like, hear me, if you're blaming God for everything that's going on in your life, you're not concerned with sinning against him. You don't care. But he's concerned. He's like, I don't want to do something that would displease him. So he's very aware of this. And those are some ways that we get it wrong. And now as we think about how we get it wrong, then we've got to ask the question, okay, how does it change us? How does suffering at the hands of other people, how does it change us? And it changes us really like all things. It changes us from the inside out. And part of that is it changes and questions like our perspective. That if we're trusting God as we experience suffering, then we get to the place where we stop asking the question, why am I following God if all of this stuff is happening to me? And instead of asking that question, hey, why would I do this if all of this bad stuff is happening, our question changes. And our questions change to, okay, how do I continue to worship God in spite of what I feel? How can I continue to worship God in spite of how I'm feeling in this moment? Another way that I think the question changes is maybe instead of asking that question, another question we ask is why is God allowing this? Instead, we ask the question, how could God use this? How could God use this situation for his glory? Even another question, how do I make sure that this isn't the one that the devil uses to get me? It changes us because it changes the questions that we ask. And as we change, we become more like the person that God made us to be. That we become more like Jesus. And I like the way that the Apostle Paul talks about it. And he talks about this all over the Bible. But in 2 Corinthians, he says this talking about suffering and how suffering makes us more like Jesus. And he says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where he says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our mortal flesh. That he's talking about how suffering has this way of making us more like Jesus. And if you look at some of the examples that he mentions when he talks about suffering, it's suffering that comes at the hands of other people. I mean, I think he says perplexed. You know, when you think of a lot of the suffering we feel in our lives at the hands of other people, there's probably something about what that other person does that would be perplexing, right? Something where it's like, well, I've always been able to trust them. And then they did this thing and now I can't. We're perplexed, right? That I've never seen them do that before. They did. We're perplexed. They've never talked to me like that, but they did. They're perplexed. And he's like, those are situations that can make us more into the image of Jesus. Paul mentions also persecution, and I think we have to be super careful talking about persecution in Springfield, Missouri, right? People on the other side of the world would be like, really? That's it? Like But still, like walking with Jesus, like as we walk with Jesus, there will come moments where people will have a problem with the fact that we walk with Jesus. I'd say in Springfield, Missouri, it doesn't look so much like people have a problem with you like checking a box that I'm a Christian, or whatever. But I think where people have a problem or where we might experience more persecution is when we actually like live for the stuff we say we believe, right? Like you start praying for people who tell you like their struggles, like that's when people are going to start thinking you're weird. You start, like everyone else is like, talking badly about someone and you're like, I'm not going to do, like that's when people are going to start excluding you from those conversations. That's the kind of persecution that we experience. And here's the thing, it comes at the hands of other people. And what Paul is saying is he's saying that when that happens, we're made more into the image of Jesus. We become more like him because Jesus suffered. And because Jesus suffered, he's able to identify us in a way when we do too. And what all of this stuff does is it causes us from the inside out to grow in our trust. That our trust in God grows as a result of the sufferings that we experience. And I think it's one of those things where like we say trusting God, right? But we don't always define what it means. Like, what does it mean to trust God? Well, I think part of trusting God in the midst of the circumstances that we face is realizing what we sang in the song. That he's with you. It's realizing just because this circumstance isn't what I want doesn't mean that he's not with me. That's part of what it looks like to trust God. The part of what it looks like to trust God is in spite of what you're going through, to continue to hold him in a high esteem. Continue to think that he is God, that he is great, that he does know best. That believing that in spite of what you're going through. Even part of trusting him, it's this idea where it's like, I am going to handle this the way that I think he would want me to handle it. I trust him, and because I trust him, I'm going to do what I think he would want me to do, not how I feel. And so that's how it changes as we grow in our trust. And then the question is, okay, how does it help others? How can suffering that comes at the hands of other people, how does it help others? And I think it does. There's something really powerful about being faithful to God in spite of what you're going through. Last week, I talked about a study that says that everyone hates their job. And I think that's pretty true. Most people hate their jobs. And a lot of times the reason why people hate their job is because of like a promotion they didn't get, right? It's when they thought they should have gotten or thought they should have received and they didn't get it. And there's this frustration there because they feel, okay, I'm not going to pretend like that's easy when that happens. But let's just pretend that scenario is there. You wanted a promotion, you wanted to get this opportunity, it didn't happen, and it went to someone else. Let's say that happens to you, and you keep going back to work. And not only do you keep going back to work, but you have a really good attitude while you're there. That not only do you have a really good attitude while you're there, but you actually like try to make it easier for the person who got the promotion that you thought you should have got. That you don't sit there at the break room or when everyone's having lunch, you don't sit there and talk about how you would do it differently if you were in charge. But really, you keep going to work, you keep having a good attitude, you keep, just being gracious. Well, you're saying something about Jesus to your work when you handle difficult situations like that. You're going in a way that is incredibly countercultural and actually really powerful. And what that does is it helps people know that that's a way that they can respond. It helps people know that God is in control even when things don't go the way that we would think. And here's the thing that can happen, though, is when we get, like when suffering comes our hands, it comes our way at the hands of other people, that we can become so like insulated, so just focused on ourselves that we completely forget about everyone around us. So much so that instead of remembering the fact that God has given me gifts, that God has put me here, that God can use me in this situation, all we do is think about how bad we've got it. And if we're doing that, then God isn't going to use us because we're only focused on ourselves. I mean, think about Joseph. Like, God had given him a gift that he could interpret dreams. That this was something that was unique to him in this prison. He was able to do it. And if Joseph would have just sat there and had a self-justified pity party, he would have never gotten out of prison because he was just thinking about himself and he wasn't thinking about other people. I even think about Joseph and I think about his story and how it ended up helping other people. And gosh, his grace helped his brothers in a significant way. It's kind of funny how the story ends, that his brothers, they end up coming to Joseph at the end of Genesis. and they're like, hey, because their dad had just died. And they're like, hey, just so you know, Joseph, Dad, you weren't there, but Dad said, don't kill us after he dies. So I know you're going to want to kill us after he dies, but Dad said don't. So just want you to know, he said that, and so whatever, like we know that all that stuff happened, but like Dad made sure to look out for us by making sure you don't. And Joseph, he realized that was a ruse because his dad never cared about it. I'm just kidding. But he knew that was a ruse, but he responds to them in a way that shows them what God is like. Look at this, Genesis 50, verse 20 and 21. Joseph says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I'll provide for you and your little ones. And so he provides for them. But he shows them that God is so gracious. That God is a level of gracious that would make most of us probably feel a little uncomfortable. And he's like, he shows us that, yeah, you guys, you meant to harm me. You did. That was your plan. You wanted me dead and forgotten. But here's what God does. Is God took your plan and he worked it into something good. Because what Joseph realizes if these guys would have never sold him into slavery, he would have never got to Egypt. And if he would have never got to Egypt, they all would have died in a famine. He's like, God was working. He was able to use the suffering that you caused me ultimately for your good and for mine. So then how does suffering that comes in the hand of other people bring God glory? Well, whenever we can respond to someone who hurts us like Joseph did, God is glorified. That God is exalted. Because the only reason why we would ever respond to someone that way is because God has transformed our hearts. Because God has done something so significant that we're going to respond to someone in a way that would be completely different than the way the rest of the world would respond. But as I think about how it brings God glory, I can't help but think of the greater Joseph. And the greater Joseph is Jesus. And I say greater because Jesus experienced very similar things to that Joseph experienced, but everything Jesus experienced is worse. I mean, you think about Joseph. It was horrible. He was sold into slavery. Life was hard. Jesus, he was crucified. Even thinking about this idea of how God, like what you intended for harm, God intends for good. Think about the cross in light of that. What did the devil think with the cross? He thought, I got him. It's over. God's son is dead. That's not how it worked. God took this thing and ultimately ended up using it for good. Think about Joseph and why Jesus is the greater Joseph. Joseph didn't sign up for anything he experienced. Everything that experienced him was cast upon him. Everything Jesus experienced, he chose. Jesus chose to walk out of heaven. Jesus knew that he was going to die on the cross. Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed by his brothers. And he did all of it for us. That God is glorified if in the midst of our suffering we can remember him who suffered far more and who deserved it far less. Look at this quote by R.C. Sproul. It kind of leans into the cliche that we talk about sometimes with suffering, and he says, why do bad things happen to good people? And he says, that only happened once, and he volunteered. And to keep that perspective in the midst of what we go through is a reminder that God is glorified in what we do. Let's pray. God, we love you. we're thankful, God, that even in the midst of the most difficult, frustrating suffering, you can be glorified. Even here, I mean, God, maybe there are people here and they're experiencing incredible suffering, and that's the thing that brought them to church. I pray by the power of your Spirit that you might even use that thing that the enemy is using for bad, that you might bring that about, or that very thing is the thing that brings them to you. God, would you do it? Would you save people by the power of your Spirit? God, would you help us as people who suffer, as people who endure things that are difficult? God, let us not be those who make it worse by doing what we feel, but God, let us be people who trust you in spite of what we go through. God, help us to be changed by it, and to be changed by it in a way that ultimately results in you being glorified and other people coming to know you better. Jesus, we love you. We thank you for who you are. We thank you for what you do. God, would you be glorified in all that we do today? It's in your name. Amen. Love you guys.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope that this service was everything that you needed it to be. And if you would like to find out more about what's going on at New Life Church, check us out online at nlspringfield.com. From there, you can find out more about our staff. You can see upcoming events. And if you would like to give to New Life Church, you can go to giving.nlspringfield.com. Have a great week, everybody.